Oh, good morning, everybody. And welcome to Ellensburg, Washington, USA. It's a very snowy Saturday morning here in Ellensburg. Had to walk in. So much snow on the ground, just me and the snowplows this morning coming into school. Beautiful out there. Thank you for joining us. The local time is about 8:50 in the morning, and we will begin our program in 10 minutes at the top of the hour at 9 o'clock local time. As always, so grateful to you for joining us live. And a special hello to those of you who are watching the replay and on Facebook. I just remembered that I could also broadcast this live on Facebook at the same time. I have no idea if that's happening, but hello to Facebook people if you happen to be watching this as well. I'm going to email our two guests this morning, but let me do this before I forget. Here we are, Saturday morning, December 10th, for session G, and we will be doing this 24 hours from now as well. So both Saturday and Sunday, the next 2 weekends, we will be doing these shows. In session H tomorrow, we'll feature Erin Donaghy from Purdue University. Some of you remember her from past live streams and past videos in the field. So looking forward to visiting with Erin tomorrow morning. Can I just take a quick look and see if we're 5 by 5, and also let me just email the guests then, make sure that we get them functional here in the green room, and then we will say hi to a few folks before we start this morning. I see some 5 by 5s, thank you. Mark's in Puyallup, Washington, Tom's in Sequim, Washington, Kamloops, BC, there's a skiff of snow up there. Peter says good morning from Calgary, Pueblo, Colorado. Backcountry Gary in slushy, soggy Darrington, Washington. Hi, Gary. Bitterroot, Montana. Menominee, Wisconsin. Greetings from Silesia. This is Brandon's first live stream. Good morning, Brandon. There's Moto JW. That's Jason, the drone guy from Wenatchee. Good morning, Jason. Got some old friends here as well as some new people as well. Thibault Moltini. Busy time. Yeah, Laura's in Lake Chelan. A lot of Washingtonians here. Huh? Do we have any Idaho folks? Alberta Gary, Ontario, Canada. Oftentimes these morning shows are also popular among people in other time zones on the other side of the Atlantic, like Tolga, Norway, good morning, and Helsinki, Finland. Hello, Petri, and Alan, Oahu, Hawaii. Pretty early there, Alan. Gary's in Hood River, Oregon. This is always so fun. Geneva in Cologne, Germany. Den's in Dorset, UK. Hodge 173 is in Saskatchewan, BC, the Netherlands, Yarmouth, UK, and so on. Okay, let me continue with that fun. But before I do so, let me email our guests. It's going to Paul Link and J. Brian Mahoney. So hoping that they will appear in the green room in the next few moments, and looking forward to visiting with them. You say we're 5 by 5, so I'm not going to worry about that. I'm too comfortable. I'm too comfortable. We know that means there's trouble coming, technology-wise, but I'm too comfortable right now. Part of it's when you start doing these regularly, you kind of get in the flow, and it just gets more, like anything, the more you do it, the more comfortable you are. But it wasn't that long ago we had Jerome on the side of the road, which did not work. So let's keep for this show. I see Paul Link's in the green room, and that's great. Thank you, Paul, for joining us. David is in Eagan, Minnesota, and Honey Greg's in East Tennessee. Jack is in Warren, Maine. Good morning. John's the Outer Banks of North Carolina. Richard's in Gypsum, Colorado. Lots of North Americans. Bimman's Bakery. Oh, okay. Yeah. Good morning, Jeff. Jack McMichael says, John Stockton said hello. If that's real, Jack, that's a thrill. John Stockton, former NBA player who lives a few hours away in downtown Spokane, is a hero of mine. I'll just take that. I'll just take that. Thank you. That's a thrill. I won't even wonder about the validity of that. Thank you. Skagit Ed in disguise. What? I don't understand now. Randy's in Billings, Montana. We got some more Europeans or Australians. Not too early for Australia, New Zealand, I guess, or too late or whatever. I don't know. But like, let's just do a few more. We got 5 minutes, and we'll see if Mahoney can appear. Paul, I can see you live in the green room there. So it's good. Nice wave. I'm glad we're functional there. That's terrific. Garrett, the Dutch night owl from the Netherlands. Okay, well, there is Mahoney in the green room. Thank you. But why did I hear that over here? That's not good. Why did I hear that over here? Why did I hear that over there? I'll have to process that one. Good morning, Brian. You're in the green room. That's wonderful. Thank you. Okay. Well, we'll say hi to a few more. Well, I had that once before. Why did that audio show up there? Athens, Greece. Hello. Good afternoon to you. KC and ZCB are watching the World Cup in geology at once. Oh, I'm totally out of it with World Cup stuff. So didn't realize that we had competition this morning. Makes sense. Maybe I'm one of the few who are not following the World Cup. Bath, UK, Jefferson City, Missouri, Visalia, California, near Sierra Batholith, Yorkshire, UK, Carthage, North Carolina. This is my first time to actually watch live. Well, hello, MV Volker. Welcome. Jackson, Louisiana. Howdy from Oklahoma City. Glasgow, Scotland. That's Gordon. He says it's pretty cold there, too. Yeah, I worked up a sweat walking in. It's one of those mornings, it's in the 20s Fahrenheit, but I don't know, 5-6 inches of white fluffy stuff. It's beautiful. But the old family van wasn't into making it to school, I didn't think, but the road's not plowed. Okay, we have both of our guests in the green room. That is terrific. I've got just a couple minutes to get my head right before we begin. Slightly thrown by the audio coming from that laptop, but I will probably figure that out once we get to our guests. Why would that be? Okay, it doesn't matter. I got to concentrate on what we're doing today. Thank you for joining us. We'll start the program in 2 minutes. Hot mic. Okay, both guests are in the green room. That worked out. And Mahoney's going to share his screen. He may or may not have 2 monitors, but you're not worried about that. He knows the background there. Still getting audio from that other laptop. Why? Should I turn that audio off? No, don't bother with it. You don't understand it, but don't bother with it. Don't be thrown by that. You got to focus on the geology. Come on, boy, concentrate. Okay, you do have a laptop. You do have some slides. Keep them fast. You're going to review the Calgary stuff. You're going to do it quickly with your colored pencils and a little bit of the chalkboard, but you can't get bogged down. Our guests have a lot to say this morning. You're going to get to Paul 20 minutes after. That's the goal. 20 minutes or less of you. Talking to you, boy. 20 minutes or less of you. Get to Paul. Reminisce with Paul. Bring in Mahoney. And then they have stuff. They have slides. They have specific things to build off of what you're doing. They might even correct you once or twice. You can handle that. You can handle that. That's positive. You're talking to the experts now. Open your ears. Listen as hard as you can. Okay. You can do this. You can do this. I'm serious. You can do this. Hello and good morning from Ellensburg, Washington, USA. Thank you for joining us for this very special episode of Baja BC A to Z. It's a very special episode because personally, I have history in the state of Idaho. This is my old license plate from when I was a graduate student in Pocatello, Idaho at Idaho State University. And our two guests were at Idaho State University when I was there. Brian Mahoney was a classmate, a fellow graduate student. He was a couple of years ahead of me, and he was on his way out as I was coming in the fall of 1986. But I overlapped with Mahoney, got to know him a fair amount. And the other guest this morning is Professor Paul Link, who was the heart and soul of that geology department for 40 years and just retired recently. And so Paul is also a big part of today's program. So Paul Link and Brian Mahoney are our special guests this morning. But you've seen these programs before. You know that I like to do a few things before we bring in a guest or two. And the main thing I'm trying to do is continue some narratives from past shows. And the most recent episodes with the Nanaimo group have been from Canadians, Jerome Lessman, and then Danny Coots, and then Will Matthews. Those past three shows factor in directly to what we're talking about today. But you're going to hear a different version of the story and a different view from some of the same data from our guests today. A quick programming note, this will be very quick. We're doing this again tomorrow morning, session H, Sunday morning at 9 a.m., but this will be a transition show away from the Nanaimo and heading towards the Coast Mountains batholith, which we'll be talking about on Wednesday and next Saturday morning. And so by the end of today, we'll be done with our Nanaimo bars from Vindman's Bakery. You've got to love it. So this is the last of four Nanaimo group sedimentary live streams. So I think we'll eat this together at the end of the show to celebrate. Thank you, Vindman's, for the gifts. Okay, quit screwing around. Let's get right to it. So you've seen the outline, and I think here's how I want to start. Going back a few letters in our series this winter, you remember I set up the idea that there's kind of a range, these are my numbers, 1 to 10, with people who are thinking about Baja BC. If you are a 10, you are a mobilist, meaning you want more than 3,000 kilometers of movement up the North American west coast between 85 and 55 million years ago. You want stuff coming from Baja, Mexico, and sending it to British Columbia. Get it? Baja BC. So I'm not sure we've had any true 10s, maybe Basil, but whatever. So that's one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum, if you're a 1 on the scale of 1 to 10, you don't want any movement north at all. And I'm here to guess that our guests today, I don't think are 1s. I think if you're a true 1, you don't want any northward movement. And I think after reading the new paper today from Brian Mahoney and Paul Link, which we will feature today, and it's available at the website, they have the Nanaimo sedimentary basin in Oregon. And then they're going to move it up north to where it is today in British Columbia. So they're moving it north, just a few hundred kilometers, not a few thousand kilometers. So I'm guessing, we'll see what they say, but I'd put them at about a 2.5. Remember that I'm at about an 8.5. I'm maybe even more of a Baja BCer than our Calgary friends, who by the end of the last show had some evidence to put things in Southern California, not Baja. But I'm fluid. I don't have to stay at an 8.5. Maybe after today's show, I'll be down to a 7. I don't know. You know, I guess I'm hoping we can all be kind of fluid on our scale as we continue to visit with these experts. Okay. One big message from the last couple of shows is that up until this brand new paper by Will Matthews, 2022, just came out a couple of weeks ago, Up until then, it was kind of a Lemhi group in Idaho versus a Mojave group from Calgary, meaning that the source of the old Precambrian grains, the old PCers, either came from central Idaho, the Lemhi subbasin, versus Southern California and the Mojave. But if you remember the last show, the Calgary folks, who were just kind of arguing back and forth with Brian and Paul, admit now, or see differently now, that they do like those old Precambrian grains coming from central Idaho. And this Mojave thing is kind of done. It's kind of gone, at least temporarily, from this Calgary group, Will Matthews and Danny Coots. But you remember there were some metamorphic rims around most of those old PC grains, and that is a new discovery from the Calgary group, Will Matthews in particular. And so, yeah, the original stuff coming from Idaho that is now in the Nanaimo Basin, but what are we going to do with those rims? What's our interpretation of those young metamorphic rims? So before I lose this introductory chalkboard, I got a couple things with my colored pencils I want to share with you that I did this morning at like 4:30 in the morning. I couldn't get back to sleep after I woke up. Too much information. Mahoney's brand new paper not only has the old PC grains, you have to look at the last couple of shows to make sense of some of these inside phrases, okay? The old PCers, so obviously Mahoney's paper is focusing on those yet again. Detrital zircons originally coming from the Lebhi subgroup in central Idaho, but he has a multidisciplinary approach. I say he, but it's a group. There's some Mesozoic detrital zircon grains that clearly are coming from the Coast Mountains batholith, and that's why we're visiting with two Coast Mountains batholith experts in the next few shows. Mahoney also has some cobbles, some river stones that are quartzite that have been collected in the Nanaimo that look like they're cobbles coming from Idaho, so says this paper, like they're Idaho spuds, Idaho potatoes that got brought. And then finally, there's a fourth line of evidence from the new paper from Mahoney and others. Muscovite. You know, muscovite are these fragile little kind of clear flakes, like not biotite mica, but muscovite mica. Where did that flaky muscovite come from? Mahoney's paper says the Idaho batholith. Okay, so get rid of this chalkboard. Keep it fast. What are you doing? Keep it fast. You're already too slow. Keep it fast. Keep it brisk. I mean, I'm almost showing this every time now, but I'm making adjustments. I've gotten rid of the Columbia River basalts. We've already made that point. They're gone. We're now today visualizing that the old Precambrian sand grains that are now in the Nanaimo, the confetti cake, came from Idaho. And our guests today are going to say, well, why do we have to get fancier than that? Why can't we just have this stuff erode out of central Idaho, follow rivers, dump it into the Nanaimo? The Nanaimo's in Oregon, move it north into British Columbia, end of story. What are we doing? Talking about Southern California or all this other stuff. We're going to visit with them to get more, but that's their main thought. And so, yes, they are below a 4 for sure on the 1 to 10 scale. Reminding you that the Nanaimo group sits on the insular, the Baja BC block. That's why we care. For our guests who are listening right now, I've ignored the intermontane in this discussion to this point. I don't know what to do with it. I don't know how it helps. Are these rivers truly crossing the intermontane the whole time during the Nanaimo deposition? We might touch on that. The intermontane was talked about a fair amount in the new Mahoney paper, but I'm a virgin with that. I haven't thought much about the intermontane with this discussion. I've been focusing so much so far in this winter on the insular superterrain. Last thing I want to do on the chalkboards before I go to the laptop. This looks familiar from our Will Matthews show on Wednesday. Here's the Lemhi source. Here's the Mojave source. Even Will Matthews and Danny Coots are now agreeing with our guest today that the original sand grains, the old PCers, the old Precambrian sand grains that are making up much of the Nanaimo Basin, those original sand grains with the Lemhi doublet, 1,700 million year old sand grains and 1,380 million year old sand grains. Those are coming from central Idaho. Both groups agree with this now. But you remember, and to me this is the most exciting part of the last couple of shows, maybe to you too. Starting 84 million years ago and continuing consistently until 63 million years ago at the very end or the very top of the Nanaimo confetti cake, we have a steady supply of these old PC grains, and according to Matthews, damn near every one of those old PCers has a metamorphic rim, and the metamorphic rim was created younger than 100 million years ago. What does that tell us? It's those metamorphic rims that Will Matthews thinks is evidence that we were farther south. Still working on trying to piece that together in my mind. But the last thing with the colored pencils is this. So yes, we're still speculating on this story, Darrell Cowan, 25 years ago. And yes, the Nanaimo is along for the ride. Notice the dates here are roughly during the time that we're depositing the Nanaimo, but is this really the story? This is a 10. Darrell's a 10 on the 1 to 10 scale. 2 years ago when I taught the Nanaimo and did the best that I could, I had a message like this. This is from 2 years ago. 90 to 66 for the Nanaimo group. The lower and the upper Nanaimo. And the upper Nanaimo has submarine fan deposits, still agree with that. The lower Nanaimo means shallow marine or even non-marine, still agree with that. But 72 is not the big number, as I've learned it from the past 2 shows. This is my creation this morning, and this is my best way to summarize where I am currently with what I think I'm understanding from these guests. And we'll see if our guests today want to push back on any of this. But as I'm holding this up in front of you, let me just narrate very quickly. 90 to 63 is our Nanaimo sedimentation. The lower Nanaimo is being deposited just for 6 million years, between 90 and 84, and there's sand and cobbles coming from both the east and the west. We're bringing Vancouver Island bedrock eroded material, detrital, from Rangelia itself, the Sicker group. And also the Coast Mountains batholith, which we don't know much about, but we'll learn a lot about in the next week, in a shallow marine or even non-marine setting. But then what the hell happened? Sorry, Patrick, what the hell happens 84 million years ago? Is it a coincidence that 84 million years ago or 85 million years ago, the Sierra Nevada arc shuts off? That's Basil's message. Is it a coincidence that 85 million years ago, the strike slip motion on the western Idaho shear zone stops? Is it a coincidence that the Baja BC translation to the north begins everything's either stopping abruptly or starting abruptly 85 million years ago? Well, in the Nanaimo, there's also this major change. The floor drops out. 84 million years ago, the floor of the Nanaimo Basin rapidly subsides, apparently, and into this rapidly dropping basin come the old PCers, the old blue grains that everybody's now seeing is coming from the Lemhi subbasin of central Idaho. Every grain looking about the same for 20 million years, a steady supply of these old PCers. And at the same time, there's still grains coming from the nearby Coast Mountains batholith. But it's a deep marine setting. These are underwater. These are submarine fans. And it's not a change throughout this story. It's a steady, homogeneous signature. That's a shock to me. And maybe to you too. What implications does that have? Terrible grammar there. If I zero in on just one of those many blue grains in the upper Nanaimo, here's my best way to summarize this, that the pit or the nucleus of each of those sand grains, the old PCers, are from the Lemhi doublet. That's sedimentary bedrock in central Idaho that's eroded by rivers and deposited into the Nanaimo Basin. But the new information from the brand new paper last time with Will Matthews is every one of those old PCers has a metamorphic rim. The metamorphic rim was created less than 100 million years ago. And are our guests going to say those metamorphic rims were also created in Idaho? I mean, I know the belt supergroup is like borderline sedimentary / metamorphic rock, I guess, but I think these metamorphic rims, if I heard correctly last time, indicate high grade. They indicate hot temperatures, high pressures. And I don't think we have that metamorphism happening in Idaho. Just giving our guests some thoughts on what they might want to say here. I'm very, very curious about this. And that's where I am currently mentally. Before we go to our guests, I've got a few slides to share. It's mostly nostalgia time. I hope you don't mind. But that's part of this show here today. Before the nostalgia, can I remind you that if you go to nickzentner.com and you click in the Baja word that's in the upper right, there are science papers. And I've learned from you that many of you are following along with these papers, doing your homework ahead or watching or reading them afterwards or both. Excuse me. Getting all excited. I got cotton mouth at the moment. So here's the featured paper. It is a major paper. It's going to take you a long time. It took me a long time. And Mahoney is the lead author, and this is mostly, I think, reflections on Mahoney's career, as far as I can tell, but whatever. I may be overstating it. And look at this. So we've got, where are you 1 to 10 on the scale? Implications, tectonics, paleomag, the whole thing. A companion paper, which I admit, Brian, I have not even really glanced at, is also by Mahoney, and I don't know who Asava is, but Mahoney can help us understand who this is and the role of this companion paper. But I'm sorry, I haven't even cracked that one open. And when I visited with Paul Link yesterday, he mentioned that this paper, which is more than 20 years old now, notice also this is Paul and Brian, and I guess this was an Idaho State graduate student, possibly of Paul's. This is when Paul Link got into the world of detrital zircon, I think. But we'll visit with Paul first before we bring in Brian and get a sense of this. But Link has been involved with detrital zircon work with Precambrian rocks, as I understand it, from Idaho for the last 20 years. Okay, some visuals to help us, and then we go to our guests, I promise. Guests, I'm giving you a 5-minute warning. Paul, primarily, 5-minute warning. So I think it's helpful to go back and remember that our photos that were donated to us by Eric Kolb up in Vancouver Island country helps us remind ourselves what this Nanaimo actually looks like. And I don't really know if we're in the upper or the lower Nanaimo right now, but I do know that I'm reminding ourselves that there are these incredible stones, these incredible river rocks that apparently are not a rare thing in the exposure of all this Nanaimo group. They call them the Gulf Islands, offshore of Vancouver Island. So these are the deposits we're talking about, and for the first time, we're not talking about sand exclusively today. We're talking about this cobble material from Mahoney. And he emphasizes in his new paper that his quartzite cobbles are coming from the Jeffrey Formation, which is towards the upper part of the Nanaimo group. Not the Gabriola where Jerome was trying to live stream from, but one down. And I think he grabbed 5 quartzite cobbles and added the details of those 5 quartzite cobbles to his paper. From Danny's show, remember that we've got everything depositing in the upper Nanaimo underwater, in deep marine water, in these submarine fans. So it's easy to forget that we've got the floor dropped out and this stuff is being deposited off the edge of the continental slope. Also, Danny helping us remember that these zircons from the Calgary group, and again, they got more than 10,000 of these grains. 3,000 of them that have been done with this depth profile business to find these rims. I mean, the data set from the Calgary group is just mind-blowing as far as how many grains they were physically putting through their instruments. Okay, finally, Paul, I just have to do this. So I left Wisconsin, University of Wisconsin, brand new basic car my parents bought me for graduation from the University of Wisconsin, drove out, stopped, took this picture in the Grand Teton, Jackson Hole area, right before arriving in Pocatello. I did not know a soul, but those 3 years at Idaho State University were tremendously important to me. And I just have memories of this, like every weekend, just going out with this dinky little car, and just this incredible outdoor natural laboratory was available to me. And it wasn't just me, of course. Every grad student at Idaho State University in the geology department was experiencing what I experienced. And this was our scene back in the 1980s at Idaho State University. And within a month of arriving, the entire department, this was so revolutionary to me, the entire department went on a field trip. Fall of 1986, leaving 5 p.m. on Wednesday and getting back late on Sunday night. It wasn't just a couple students and Paul Link, it was the entire freaking department. I couldn't believe it. And it snowed most of the weekend in late September. And I didn't have the right winter. I froze the whole time. I think I had a Letterman's jacket on, and I didn't even have mittens, I remember. But one day, these were all Paul Link students at the time. Bob Darling, Dave Stewart, I think. Here's Brian Mahoney. They each took a day. Fal Momoy was a faculty member at the time. But we all spent this 3-night experience, 4-night, I don't know, up in central Idaho. So here's some photos from that. So just experiencing this, I realized I had picked the right graduate school right away. I wasn't just doing stuff in a classroom. I was out there learning this stuff, even though it was under snow. It took me weeks to recover from that trip, mostly mentally. I just couldn't believe the amount of geology that was right there. And yeah, frozen the entire time. Thankfully, I had my little wool cap, but otherwise, man, I don't think I slept most of that trip. Here's Paul Link, our guest today, leading us on day whatever. I think we're looking across to the Lost River Range. I'm not even sure. I guess this is the Stanley Basin. And then I did a thesis proposal. I dug through my archives yesterday afternoon. I found my thesis proposal where I had my little colored pencils, and I was a rookie. I'd never done any science writing before. And I was proposing a project at the Fish Creek Reservoir window. I barely even remember proposing this. Had my little colored pencils, and I wrote up this proposal. I had no idea what I was doing. And here's Paul Link in red and Dave Rogers in blue, just tearing this thing to shreds. This is very unclear, says Paul. Rogers says, yes. What about our Wood River Basin reconstructions? What faults are younger or older? You never discussed the thrusting event or the severe orogeny or the Wood River Basin, Pioneer Mountains Core Complex, Snake River Plain development. I mean, these guys wanted a lot more out of me. I was just totally lost. Balanced cross-section will require deciding which faults are Mississippian, which are Cretaceous, which are even tertiary. How will you do this? Rogers says, yes. Paul, what will you sample? What will you look for? And when you're struggling, and when you're new, and when everything's just totally just passing through you and you not even sure you belong, comments like this are extremely, I still remember reading this comment. Here's Paul, you write well. And you've gotten partway into the problem, but much has been left out. And Rogers was less kind. So it took me a year to figure out what was going on. I didn't even have a teaching assistantship. I didn't have the grades to even be allowed to be in there permanently, but I managed to convince everybody that I was at least worth sticking around. So I got promoted the second year to this office, finally got a desk with the rest of the grad students and started teaching 101. And then just to show you how those grad student years can be so transformative, especially if you're watching this and you're thinking about going to graduate school. You remember this photo when I didn't know anybody in Pocatello? Well, 3 years later, I'm getting married at that same park, and that's where I met Liz, who grew up in Pocatello, and we are still married. And guess who was at the wedding? Paul Link. and Dave Rogers and a whole bunch of the folks. So thank you for putting up with that. All right, well, a couple more minutes longer than I thought, but anyway, that was the thought. Let me get my headphones and we'll bring in Paul Link. Thank you for that indulgent. Battery 100%. Connected to Big Lappy, that's good too. Let's see if we've got Paul. Hello, Paul Link.
Hello. Hello.
How are you? You're looking good. You're sounding good. You're moving. Is there an earthquake happening right now, Paul?
Well, it's a local earthquake.
Okay. All right.
All right.
You've got a hat on. What does your hat say?
So my hat is Daryl wore his UW hat.
Yeah.
My hat is an ISU Geosciences hat, which I got to figure out where the. And
yep, you got it.
It's got a guy climbing a mountain and says, "Living the dream." And we had a grad student, Connor Hansen, about 10 years ago, who designed this hat, and so we're very proud of it. Anyway,
it's a good one. Thank you.
Good hat. Yep.
Every time I see you, I want to thank you for that experience that I had, and you're the main reason. You created that whole scene there, as far as I can tell. So thank you again, publicly, for all that you did there.
Good, thank you. Well, and Dave Rogers was your main guy. You kind of slid off of me and onto the Snake River Plain subsidence idea, but
yes,
I was involved. But yeah,
you were. Well, I mentioned that because in the 1980s, I don't remember talk of Baja BC. I don't remember talk of detrital zircon. You were looking at Paleozoic rocks with a bunch of your grad students around Sun Valley, Idaho, correct? So what changed? How did you get into this zircon world?
Right. Well, okay. So I'm a geologist. I'm a field geologist. These are the kinds of things that we emphasized to our students. Relations between rock units you can observe and observational stuff in the field. And this actually is one of the things I want to talk about. So good. That's one kind of knowledge. The paleomag comes from taking cores, oriented cores, demagnetization. So it's a geophysical window on the rock, but it's a whole nother kind of understanding. It's a whole nother world, and somehow it relates with the geology. And then the detrital zircons, and so I got in to the detrital zircon game pretty early. I had known Mark Fanning from Australian National University because I had gone to Adelaide, South Australia, and gotten an honors degree down there, and Mark was down there. And so in the mid-90s, Mark, through another fellow I knew, Stuart Eldridge, who used to work in the lab, Bill Compson's lab at Canberra. Anyway, the idea was, well, maybe we can use these detrital zircons, the age of the zircon grain, to resolve issues of provenance. And so we did that, maybe starting in the mid-90s, and we were pretty early in the game.
Yeah.
And then I've been riding that horse now for 30 years. And as Daryl said, it has blossomed and such that, you really don't look at sedimentary rocks anymore without doing detrital zircons, which is kind of amazing. Yeah. So, but that's another kind of understanding the world of detrital zircons. And then while I'm talking about it, so zircon geochronology, we started out with TIMS, thermal ionization, mass spectrometry, where we dissolved the grain. It was very time consuming and expensive. And that sort of was developed in the 80s. And then detrital zircon work, or actually the shrimp, there was a machine which was developed at Australian National University called a shrimp, sensitive high resolution ion microprobe. And the shrimp would put a beam of oxygen ions at a spot on a grain, and be able to then was hooked up to a mass spec, and so it could determine the isotopic age of the spot. And so in my day, Mark Fanning was using the shrimp, and the technology had just been developed by Bill Compton, the prof there. And so we were worried about money always. And so 60 grains from a sandstone, that could give you a good signature. And so these days,
were you sending those sand grains to Australia literally in the early days to get your results?
Well, I was sending the sand grains, and I was going to Australia. So I ran the machine. And one of the jokes, we're kind of off the top, but one of the joke was the shrimp was so easy to run that a trained monkey could run a shrimp, is what Bill Compton, the inventor of the shrimp, said. Anyway, so 60 grains from a sandstone. Whoa, that's a lot better than Tim's. So now the technology has evolved. And so instead of a shrimp, we use a laser, and the laser hits the grain, and then you measure the ions with a mass spec. And so first, for a while, we were going for 100 grains. And then we got into the large N business, which Coots and Matthews talked about, hundreds of grains. And the cost went down, and so you can hit more grains. But my point is the precision versus accuracy discussion. And this is a philosophical discussion. Mm-hmm. So in my opinion, and I had an NSF grant, did a bunch of grains from the Snake River area, 60 grains a sample. The accuracy was pretty good. We knew from those 60 grains what populations of detrital grains were in the sample. And so now, if precision maybe wasn't so good, you had a 3 grains, how many grains are important. So now we've raised the bar. Now we're shooting for 300 grains. And so the Calgary guys are like, oh, this is great. We got so many thousands of grains. Well, that's fine. That's precision. But I don't think we necessarily have learned much about the provenance of that sample from 60 to 100 to 300. Maybe it's statistically more valid. But as you'll see, the data that Brian and I are going to talk about are based on 60 or 100 grains. And so some people might say, oh, well, you don't have 300 grains, you go away. But the point is that those, the higher N number might be more accurate, but might be more precise, but it's not more accurate. The same populations are there. So that's one of my points.
Thank you. And you mentioned Brian. I think I'd like to bring him in right now. Are you okay if we do that? And then we start kind of sharing some of the slides that you guys have?
Yep.
Okay, good. Brian, we're coming at you. We're going to bring you in, make this work. Brian Mahoney, how are you today?
Doing fine. Hello.
It's great to have you. Where are you today, Brian?
I moved out of my lab where I was doing heavy liquids to my office because I needed 2 monitors.
Yeah, right. Okay, well, you got that part figured out. Well, I see your shared screen in the green room, so that's wonderful. So we're catching you just briefly before you head internationally. Is that right? Are you still teaching at Eau Claire, Wisconsin?
I just taught my last class of the semester, and I'm going to Antarctica on Tuesday.
Wow, congratulations. That was a long run of teaching, and it sounds like you have an exciting opportunity now. So I'm glad we're catching you before we take off. Thanks for your time. Before we go to any slides, so Paul just described his kind of early days of using labs in Australia. Which labs have you been using over the years, Brian? Do you have your own fully functional lab right there in Wisconsin?
I have walked hand in hand with Paul Link for the past 30 years. We
Okay.
did the shrimp together. We did the shrimp together in Australia. We started working in George Garrell's lab in the 1990s. We still work in George Garrell's lab. We've watched all this evolution of this technique through time. And so it's an amazing technology these days. And so we do all of our processing here, and then we do all the zircons at George's and Mark Pecca's lab in Arizona.
In Tucson, Arizona. Okay, terrific. And one more thing, just you two guys. So who got who into this zircon game? Like back in the 80s, you guys were both doing traditional mapping, I think, in central Idaho. So was it Paul that got Brian into the zircon thing, or vice versa?
What's your recollection on that, Link? I remember doing it in the Metau with Mark Kiesling. We started doing that stuff there.
Didn't Pete Mustard do some DZ's work?
Pete Mustard did a little bit of Tim's with a little bit of Tim's.
Tim's, okay.
He
So
started.
Pete Mustard started the Tim's DZ work, and then I got involved with Fanning, and then we both went to Canberra in whenever that was, 01-ish, and ran the shrimp, and that was kind of the beginning of the shrimp days. But Pete Mustard, and then my connection with Mark Fanning.
It was earlier than that, Paul, because we published the paper on the Nanaimo on the Peninsula Range batholith in 1999. So we were probably in Canberra in 1997, 96, 97, 98.
Okay. And Mahoney, it's not an accident that you started working with the Nanaimo, because you left Pocatello and went up to BC for your PhD. Is that correct?
I did my dissertation at the University of British Columbia. I got involved in Canadian Quaternary geology quite heavily. My dissertation was looking at a bunch of Middle Jurassic rocks to the northeast of Vancouver in some of the terrains that Paul is going to talk about right now. And just as I was finishing my PhD in 94, all this paleomagnetic data started hitting the streets. And so it was obviously that we had a conundrum between the geologic interpretation, the paleomagnetic interpretation, and we've been beating this horse for the past 20 years.
All right. Well, let's get into it. So if you want, I'll bring your screen in. We're going to go full screen. We're not going to be able to see each other. Oh no, Mahoney will, because he'll be on his second monitor. Actually, Paul, never mind me. Paul, you'll still be able to see us too, I think.
There you are in the corner.
Yes. And these are small enough that I'm going to make this as big as we can. So we are going to go away for just a bit. So whomever wants to narrate here, and I'll just kind of leave it to you guys to go.
Okay, and you can see my pointer.
No. I guess I can see a pointer now.
That's my pointer, Paul.
Okay, so here is a map of southern British Columbia showing the terrains, and I guess I would point out that the north striking fault right through the middle of the thing of the map, that's Nick's Baja BC fault. So that's the fault that is allegedly 3,000 Ks of movement on. And then to the east of this fault is the intermontane superterrain, which Nick mentioned. And this is composed of Triassic, Jurassic, Cretaceous, Middle Cretaceous, volcanic terrains. Quinellia is a name that is one of the sub units of the intermontane superterrain. And then on the west of that fault is and it says Churn Creek. East of the fault, it says Spence's Bridge. These are the names of stratigraphic units we're going to talk about. On the west of that is the insular superterrain, and in the insular superterrain includes the rocks that the true Baja BC part. And in the southwest of this map is Vancouver Island, and the Nanaimo group is exposed as that brown stuff along the east side of Vancouver Island.
Thank you.
And, okay, and then the pink here, is the Coast Mountains batholith, and which you're going to talk about more this week. And the yellow here is the Metau terrain, and then these belts continue down into the States and the North Cascades, and so they're part of this tectonic collage, if you will.
Nice.
And okay, so the next slide. Yes. Okay.
That a boy, Mahoney. Good job.
The next slide shows Paleomag sample sites data from the mid 90s. Wynn et al., Enkin, Ted Irving, and this sort of set up the Baja BC hypothesis, and so on the left is the insular superterrane and the Silver Quick Powell Creek conglomerate, and that red star is a paleomag site in a conglomerate, and it shows 3,000 Ks of northward translation since the late Cretaceous. And then then there's a fault, and then in the middle is the intermontane terrain, and on the intermontane terrain, Cornelia, you see there, and there's a paleomag determination from the green stuff. It says Albion volcanics, 900 Ks of paleomagnetic offset, paleomag indicated. And then the conglomerate of Churn Creek, which is what our student Jim Reister worked on. The conglomerate of Churn Creek lies, and this is the important thing, it lies unconformably on the Albion volcanics, and Jim mapped that, and it is a depositional contact. And that conglomerate has 3,000 Ks of paleomag offset. And so that's pretty interesting. And then if we go ahead.
No, that's fine. I'm just chuckling.
And so then if we go farther east across the Fraser Fault, there are Albion volcanics, Spence's Bridge Group in Cornelia, and they show 1,200 Ks of paleomag offset. So this was a problem. And we set out with Jim Reister. He worked a place called Gang Ranch, which is way up in the plateau in BC, and he mapped around very rough country, hard to get in, and determined that contact was a stratigraphic contact, was not a fault. And so we got 3,000 Ks on top of 900 Ks. 900 is from the Albion, from the Middle Cretaceous. 3,000 is from the Late Cretaceous. So that's something that makes you go, And so geologically, what we said, well, hey, this is not a fault. This is a stratigraphic contact. So this data is troubling. So we go to the next one.
Sure.
Okay.
I'm getting flashbacks. It's like it's 1987 all over again. We're just sitting in your classroom now, Link. This is good.
Yeah, it's good. Anyway, and I actually get flashbacks from listening to you. I say, well, maybe he learned that from me. Anyway, so this slide is kind of small. It's in the Mahoney et al. Paper. But let's just say that we wanted to explain these paleomag results by geology. Okay. So we would start out on the left with the Spence's Bridge volcanics formed north of the Sierra Nevada in the Albion. And then we would, at 85 to 95 MA, we would zoom them south. And then we would put the Churn Creek conglomerate on top of them, 3,000 Ks down in Baja somewhere. And then we would, this ain't no whale. This is more like a water skier. This super terrain has got to cruise northward at, I think it says 24 centimeters per year, unreasonable rate of sediment of transport, according to me and Brian. And so then this thing keeps on cruising by, and it goes by the Sierra Nevada, and there's no evidence for it deforming the Sierra Nevada, and there's no fault. We can't find a fault for it deform for where it can move, and then it cruises on up to the 70 million years north of the Sierra Nevada, and then it ends up at 50 MA up in where it is now. And so, so this is how we could explain those data paleomagnetically, or we could say, you know, I'm a geologist. That ain't a fault. That's an unconformity. This is unreasonable. And so therefore, the whole Baja BC thing is based on the paleomag data, not on the geology. And I guess I'll bring up another point here, is we mentioned, and probably various of you have mentioned, the notion of Occam's razor. The simplest explanation is often the right one. So this is not a simple explanation. This is a complicated explanation. And a simple explanation is, well, you know, the Churn Creek conglomerate didn't form that far from source areas in the intermontane terrain. And that's what the geology would say. And pretty much, you know, as you said, I've done a number of things since the Reister thesis. I had a lot of students. But I kind of figured that we nailed the Baja BC idea. We killed it. And so it's interesting to me to come back. It's kind of like the Baja BC is a zombie. It refuses to die. And Nick is now, he is advocating that zombie. And so that is interesting to me that it you know, it's got, the paleomag data is suggestive, but maybe it doesn't work. The geology, I think we nailed the geology, but then Mahoney, he was less sanguine about the data being dead, and so he followed this detrital zircon and isotopic analysis and stuff that he's going to talk about to prove the linkage between central Idaho, the Lemhi group, with the Nanaimo, and that's what the Mahoney et al. 2021 paper is about.
Thank you, Paul. That was excellent. We're going to do more with you in a second. I do want to talk to Brian just off of this right here. So, Brian, you did do some paleomag, or somehow you tried to bridge that gap between kind of the basic field mapping and the paleomag world, or not?
The Churn Creek, the study in Gang Ranch, which was done in part with the Geological Survey of Canada, was brought about by Darrell's paper in 1997. Darrell's paper laid out some very specific questions that had to be answered, and so we knew that we had evidence that the Intermontane Insular Superterranean had been together in late Cretaceous time, and that meant that the Baja BC was not just the insular superterranean moving, but it was both of them. And so the importance of the Churn Creek study was that we demonstrated that the Intermontane and Insular Superterranean were together in late Cretaceous time. And for the paleomag to work, as that slide Paul just showed, is you have to take those combined superterraneans all the way to the south, then move them all the way back to the north in a very short period of time. I mean, on the way to the south, that sucker's moving at 42 centimeters a year. As Paul said, you can water ski behind that thing. It's moving requires unreasonable translation rates. And so we tried to prove, we demonstrated those two superterraneans were together, and then it was time for us to look at the provenance to see if we could demonstrate if those sediments were derived from the south or derived from the north, and that's what we've been doing for the past number of years.
Two things. Do you kind of agree with Paul's statement that for a while you had so much geology that there was just no more discussion about this Baja BC thing, or did you see it less open and shut case than Paul did?
Well, the paleomagnetic data kind of stands by itself. And so the Churn Creek study came about because these guys wanted to run a 3,000 kilometer displacement fault right through the middle of southern British Columbia where legions of geologists have mapped, and there's no structure that big. And so we demonstrated that it couldn't go through. So what this data set requires that Paul's talking about is if there is a big Baja BC fault, it's got to be east of the intermontane superterrane somewhere in the Canadian Rockies, which is all myogeoclinal rocks. So that makes it difficult too. So
interesting. I mean, just to let you know, I'm very weak on paleomag. After Christmas, I'm going to try with this series to just try to dig in and do some basic stuff. And this idea from your paper was totally new to me, that you're taking it. Is that right? Intermontane and insular, you're moving it south, and then you're doing a huge yo-yo with the whole thing.
If you're going to be faithful to the paleomag, you got to do this crazy thing. And so our point was, this is not reasonable, right? Geologically reasonable to be faithful to the paleomag. So there's got to be a problem. That's what we're saying.
So some are not being faithful. Some are just doing half the yo-yo. Is that what you're saying?
You guys, you've had 4 or 5 shows. Have you talked about the insular and intermontane superterrane being one unit? So you've got to move both of them. You can't just move one. You got to move both. And so you have to adhere to that. It has to happen. In the Churn Creek study, we actually started working with Randy Yankin, who you're going to talk to in a few weeks. Randy Yankin did lots and lots and lots of paleomag. We did paleomag at the Spence's Bridge, in the Albion Volcanics, in the conglomerate Churn Creek. We did more of it in the Silver Quick. We've drilled more holes than I can count. And my name is on papers talking that these data require translation, because that's what the paleomagnetic data says. The geologic data says didn't happen. So it says so it's big. It maintains. It's still a pretty big problem.
Really interesting, and that's even more motivation to just not only learn from Incan, but Jane Wynn and some of these others who are going to be with us. And I'm a babe in the woods with some of this paleomag, and that's really what I'm trying to do here. I'm just trying to come in and try to learn from everybody. And God, I'm bringing a zombie back to life. I didn't know that. Plus, there's another T-shirt from this Paul link appearance. That ain't no whale. I got to get that on a T-shirt. Okay, very good. So there's more slides here, I think. Is it more Mahoney now for a little while? Viewers, we're going to come to you, and I don't know. I'm guessing there's more than 10 minutes of this, but we're coming to you eventually. But let's take advantage of these guys being with us. This is really exciting.
What I'd like to do in a relatively short period of time is go through the main sedimentary lines of evidence that suggest that these rocks were formed in northern latitudes. So I'm going to show several slides in kind of rapid succession, just making the main points, and then we can take them apart later as we go through. So if you go back to the slides.
Yes. And
as you've talked extensively with Bill and with Coots and Matthews, the Nanaimo is broken into 2 pieces. There's a lower Nanaimo, which is locally derived, very slow subsidence. And then there's this upper Nanaimo group, which is characterized by very rapid subsidence, deep marine sedimentation. And you've got sediments coming from the coast belt. You got an influx of Precambrian detritus, and you have a huge amount of syndepositional zircon. That's very important. So this diagram to the right here shows just schematically that in the lower Nanaimo, you've got a local Wrangelian source and local coast plutonic complex. Then you get a flood of syndepositional plutons. Here's this belt supergroup detritus, more syndepositional zircons. So it's a complicated story. So let's take apart the zircon data just very quickly, piece by piece.
Mm-hmm.
This histogram shows in red the magmatic ages out of the coast plutonic complex. The yellow shows the ages of the Nanaimo group, the young ages, not worrying about the Precambrian rocks yet. This just goes from 400 to basically 50 million years. You notice that every one of these red peaks is matched by a peak in the Nanaimo group, pretty consistently, showing the Nanaimo group got a lot of its sediments from the coast plutonic complex, except for this thing right here. There's a huge spike of 70 million year old zircons that do not come from the Idaho batholith. That do not come from the coast plutonic complex. There's no rocks of this age anywhere in the coast plutonic complex. They got to be coming from somewhere else. So we have to explain these zircons. Where are they derived from? Then you take a look at the older population. Here's the doublet you talked about with Bill Matthews. Okay, there is a very significant population, and I've got it broken down into different DZ populations. But the main point is this histogram. There's a big population of these 1,700 million year old grains, and a very significant population of these 1380s. You can take a look at a dozen or 2 dozen papers that talk about detrital zircons from the Arctic to Mexico, as we've done, and you find no evidence anywhere of 1,380 million-year-old zircons except in central Idaho. It's the only place on the entire continental margin that they exist, and they're chock-a-block full in the Nanaimo group.
Say, Nick, can you hear me?
Yes,
Yep.
I can.
Can I just say, okay, those 1380 grains, you showed Bill Matthews' CL image of the overgrowths. And to me, those look like igneous overgrowths. Those don't look like metamorphic overgrowths. Those are concentrically banded, and they are the kind of overgrowths that form from magmatic growth. Mahoney will take on from here.
You got a comment on that?
I'm just going to keep going with the metamorphic rims. Rich Gashnik has done a huge amount of work in the Idaho batholith. He demonstrated the Idaho batholith is absolutely chock full of xenocrystic zircons. The xenocrystic zircons that Rich has demonstrated, dozens and dozens and dozens of them. The xenocrystic zircons are always 1,700 million years plus or minus belt age or 1380H. Okay. And those are characterized by they're encased in granitoids that are 90 million years old, 80 million years old, 70 million years old. So the Idaho batholith is full of xenocrystic zircons, which are going to have magmatic growth rings on them. So it's no problem. Those rings do not have to come from the south. They could easily come from the Idaho batholith.
So let me hold you up. I'm slow on the uptake. You know, I had a 2.5 grade point average coming from Madison, and Paul Link accepted me on a conditional basis. Like I had to okay. So you're saying those rims, your interpretation of the metamorphic rims that are younger than 100 million years old, you agree the rims are younger than 100 million years old, but they're not metamorphic. You view them as igneous.
The vast majority, all of the Idaho batholith is younger than 80. The Idaho batholith and the Boulder batholith are all younger than 180 million years. 100 million years old.
Those images you showed,
yeah,
with the parallel bands,
right?
Those are igneous rims.
Okay, well, because they could, if they truly are metamorphic rims, there's no way to have high grade metamorphism that young in the Idaho batholith, or in central Idaho period.
That's okay. They can be high grade metamorphic. Doesn't matter.
One of the problems on the other side of the coin with the high grade metamorphic rocks that Matthews calls upon is he's saying those are coming from the Pelona Oricopia schist. Those schists do not get exposed until the tertiary. They're not a source of sediment in the Cretaceous. They're buried and undergoing metamorphism during the time of deposition of the Nanaimo. So they couldn't have come from there. They weren't exposed.
Oh, this is fun. This is fun.
Let's go with your stuff, Brian.
Yeah, more slides, baby. Let's do it. This is great.
So the argument is, so we talked about these old grains, and then the argument's been that all these Precambrian grains may have come from the latitude of Baja or the Mojave Desert. So you take a comparison, just look at the top three histograms. This is all of the old grains in the Nanaimo in green. This is all the old grains in the Northwest Mojave in orange and the Southwest Mojave in pink. You'll notice that these populations are not the same at all. They don't match whatsoever. Also, these grains in this Mojave did not make it to the forearc until sometime in the Paleocene. Okay, they were not coming through during the Nanaimo time. They are younger than the Nanaimo, these grains getting into the forearc. So these grains are not the same, number one. Number two, even if they're similar, they're not coming in the forearc at this time. Okay.
I got to interrupt you. I don't know if you had a chance to watch the Will Matthews show, but he agreed that it's not Mojave. He's had a transition, and I asked him why.
An epiphany.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I mean, So feels like these two, your group and the Calgary group, are on the same page as far as those old grains. Just throwing that out there.
And what did he do? What did he do, Nick? He said, okay, we're going to derive them from central Idaho. Then we're going to take them down the trench, all the way down into the Mojave, deposit them down there, and then we're going to put them in this terrain that nobody ever sees. And then the terrain is going to zoom north, and starting at 85 MA, we're going to unroof the terrain, and it's going to provide zircons to the Nanaimo, and we'd have no terrain. So to me, that's a violation of Occam's razor.
And And also, if you go back to the slides, talking about long distance transport of the sand, you want to move sand along the margin, fine. Look at the size of those cobbles on the left-hand side. These are quartzite cobbles out of the Nanaimo group, and we've got 5 different quartzite clasts that are statistically identical to formations in the Belt Supergroup and the Cambrian Flathead Sandstone in Idaho. They are a dead ringer for 5 different formations. So you're not going to transport that size clast 2,000 or 3,000 kilometers along the margin. This is a relatively locally derived class. Look at the size of this conglomerate class in here. These things are not coming from very far away. And there's a source for them in Idaho. Then we get to the muscovite you mentioned earlier in the show. You can look all over the place in southern British Columbia looking for muscovite. Most of the muscovite's about 90 million years old. There is no muscovite in the Canadian Southwest Cordillera that's 70 million years old. Look at these ages we've got here. You've got ages from Lower Gallibriola of 76 million years of age. Another one is 77 million years of age. Another one is 78. These don't come from the Coast Plutonic complex, but they're abundant in the 2 microgranites in the Idaho batholith. Occam's razor says this muscovite probably came from the batholith. And the last line of evidence is going to take a little bit of explaining here. This is a hafnium diagram that shows the isotopic composition of the zircons. For the audience,
Ryan, take your time with this one because I don't get the hafnium stuff at all. So please take an extra moment here.
So very simply here, if a zircon is derived from a magma that comes from a juvenile source, meaning it's never seen any continental crust, it's going to have a hafnium value that's positive, above 0, probably above 10.
Okay.
If you've got a zircon that comes from a magma system that has partially melted continental crust or included continental crust, such as the Idaho batholith, it's going to have a very negative epsilon hafnium signature. So the hafnium simply tells you whether the zircon was sourced from a juvenile source, no continental crust, or from an evolved source, abundant continental crust. So if you take, I'm going to show 4 very rapidly slides here. When you take a look at some of the population in the Nanaimo group, the 130 to 160 million year old grains are all very juvenile, no continental crust. This diagram down here is from a thesis in the Coast Plutonic complex showing that these age grains of that hafnium signature are abundant in the Coast Plutonic complex. Then you go to the 90 to 110 million year old grains. Once again, all very juvenile, okay? Abundant in the Coast Plutonic complex. A critical point here, there are no zircons of this age. There are no juvenile zircons of this age anywhere at the latitude of Mexico. Can't happen. Then you get into the youngest group, the 70 million year old, and look at the difference here. They break into 3 very distinct groups. There is a package that's clearly coming from the Coast Plutonic complex. There's a package we weren't really sure on. I'll get back to that in a second. And then there's this very evolved package of rocks here. The package of zircons here that must be coming from material that has seen continental crust. You compare these data with Rich Gashnick's data from the Idaho batholith. These zircons in the Idaho batholith are identical to these zircons here in the Nanaimo group. So there's 3 sources at 70 million years of age. There is the Coast Plutonic complex, the Idaho batholith, and then the only place you get these transitional around 0 grains, the only place you get these grains in western United States is the Colorado Mineral Belt with data from Mark Pekka. We can't find any place else. They're abundant in the Colorado Mineral Belt of western Colorado. So you take all these data together, final diagram here, present day, here's the Nanaimo sitting here nestled up on Vancouver Island at the latitude of Vancouver. You move this thing down south, the Coast Plutonic complex and the Nanaimo group down south, about 150 kilometers plus or minus. You're immediately adjacent to the Idaho batholith and the Belt supergroup over here. These sediments are feeding the Nanaimo, as is the Coast Plutonic complex. So I argue that's it. We got 5 very distinct sedimentary provenance lines of evidence that clearly suggest the Nanaimo group is deposited north of the Sierra Nevada.
Let's keep this slide up. This is excellent. So back to my intermontane thought, do you see any of this stuff on the intermontane that's in the middle ground between the Idaho source and these guys off to the west?
There are grains in the Nanaimo group that could easily come from the intermontane, some of the older Jurassic and Cretaceous plutons, easily.
Which terrain would we?
I'm showing this blue stuff here is our granitoids in the intermontane superterranean. So I'm showing it slides down south as well. The important thing about this reconstruction sliding down to the south, we can put our hand on these faults. These faults exist. Paul
Right.
Umhofer and others did this fault reconstruction in the 90s, early 2000s that reconstructs these faults beautifully and puts them exactly where they need to be. So you don't have to go looking for a phantom fault. The faults exist. They're right in front of us. We can easily prove that translation.
So we are talking to Robinson Cecil on Wednesday, Coast Mountains Belt, and Margie Russmore a week from today.
Yeah.
Before we go to the live viewer stuff, and maybe Paul's got some more things to say as well before we go to the viewers, but what can I ask the Coast Mountain Belt people as it fits into your story? What do they have? What information have you used from Robinson Cecil, let's say, with the hafnium, for instance?
The isotopic data. The isotopic
Okay.
data that show the juvenile isotopic data all comes from Robinson Cecil.
Why is the connection between the Nanaimo and the Coast Mountains Belt important?
Well, first of all, the Nanaimo was deposited on the Coast Plutonic complex. It's unconformably unconformably on the Coast Plutonic complex. The reason it's important is because if you just want to move the Nanaimo, if you want to move the Nanaimo all the way to Baja, you need to have a source of these very juvenile grains. And there is no source of these very juvenile grains at that latitude. They're all evolved at that latitude.
So
the whale,
yeah,
the Coast Plutonic complex has got to be part of the whale, but the whale was eating plankton that were coming from Idaho.
oh my God, you had a full breakfast this morning, didn't you? That was perfect. Plankton from Idaho. Yeah, well, so is everybody seeing the Nanaimo and the Coast Mountain Belt working together? Generally, even you guys, everybody is, right? That's not a question.
Well, that's a relatively recent consensus. That's not been a consensus through the whole litany of this problem. Okay, so the idea to move a big point of our studies is, first of all, the Intermontane and Intra-Superterrane are moving together, massive piece of land. Okay, and then the Nanaimo group is filled with sediment that's derived from central Idaho as well as from the Coast Plutonic complex. So you cannot take it all the way down to the south, right? You just can't do it. If you want to have it deposited at the latitude of central Idaho and then slide it all the way to the south and then move it all the way to the north without a shred of evidence that it went along the continental margin, that's kind of a stretch, I think.
Does Randy Ankin think that the paleomag in the Coast Mountains batholith was way down in Mexico?
Randy Ankin and I are good friends, and Randy Ankin had a little bit of a hard time with the paleomagnetic data because he understands the geologic data, but he understands geologic data and understands it's in direct conflict with the paleomag. But at the end of the day, Randy will say, I'm a paleomagnetist, and so I've got to believe the paleomagnetic data, and he throws up his hands as to what the problem is. He doesn't understand it. Randy and I have tried to get together to write a paper trying to explain some possibilities as to how the paleomagnetic data might be erroneous, but that's a very hard paper to write.
Wow, this is just what I was hoping for. I mean, come on, you guys are bringing the vinegar. I mean, here it is, and it's good. It's good to hear from you guys. Any final comments before we go to the live viewers? Paul, did you have any kind of follow-up thoughts?
So I was going to talk, and Daryl mentioned this a little bit, but this business about the philosophy you have and how the philosophy and the belief system you've got molds the scientific conclusions that you come to. And Will Matthews, he said, I believe paleomag. I worked on paleomag when I was an undergrad, and I believe it. I didn't work on paleomag. I'm agnostic when it comes to paleomag. I was a geologist, so I tend to accept geological data. And then the other thing is your 1 to 10 scale. I'm not sure that's fair, because you say 1 is in and out accordion, and 10 is symbols. Well, I got no trouble with symbols. They just aren't the huge symbols from Baja BC. They're Central Oregon symbols, and that's based on geologic data and this isotopic data and the DZ data. it's a problem. The paleomag data is a problem, as Brian said. And so there it is. I don't know. It's an interesting.
Yes. I mean, I don't know if we'll ever get some person to merge this paleomagnetic data set with all this bedrock geology. Does it have to be apples and oranges? I guess it has been to this point. Like, I guess Basil is maybe somebody trying to do that. I guess Mahoney as well for a time. And Mahoney, are you going to write more papers, or are you done? Like,
oh no, I think that the paper that Randy and I started about 10 years ago about the paleomagnetic data is a paper that I still really want to write, because there needs to be a close examination of the paleomagnetic data, because the paleomagnetic data is, according to the paleomagnetists, quite strong. But in this is at a time when you can look at the oceanic transport, the oceanic floor, and look at the motion of the terrains. And the data, the motion required by the paleomagnetic data cannot have happened. And so there is a problem for sure that has to be addressed, because we use paleomagnetic data to reconstruct the movement of the continents back into the Archean 3 billion years ago. If you can't trust it at 90 or 100 million years, you got a real problem. And so I would hope that somebody would take a more deep dive into the paleomagnetic data and try and understand what's going on.
Interesting. Wow. Viewers, we're coming to you. Do you guys have another 10 minutes or so? Can we do some live questions for you guys?
Sure.
I hope so. Brian, you're packing at the moment for it. Hey, you can live stream from Antarctica. How about that? We're not off the hook. You can do this next week.
I'm not packing. I'm doing heavy liquids and separating more zircons all afternoon.
Okay. All right. Okay, viewers, if you're new to us, if you can use a uppercase for your questions, and I will just grab a few that I see here and we'll go for it. Lisa asks, could the damming of the Grand Canyon, oh Lord, okay. I'm sorry, Lisa, I don't think that's going to help us here, talking about the Grand Canyon. Sorry. Sharon, is the paleomagnetic data coming from only one source? Has it been confirmed by others? So again, that's my fault. We're putting off the paleomag until next month.
You should have done the paleomagnetic data first, but so be it. The paleomagnetic data has been done. It started off with Ted Irving and others looking at plutons. That pluton data has been thrown out because you can't reconstruct paleohorizontal. But Randy Yankin and Jane Wynn and others have done a bunch of so the paleomag has been done in several different labs with very similar answers. There hasn't been any new paleomag done for about 20 years.
PMGN 844 asks, so you guys are okay with up to 900 kilometers of movement, but no more than that? Is that right?
As long as you keep that thing north of the Sierra Nevada, I don't care what you do. It's got to be north of the Sierra Nevada.
Okay. Jonathan asks, why can't the so-called Baja BC fault be horizontal, like a thrust fault in places?
It's hard to recognize how you're going to get such large-scale motion on a flat fault, number one. Number two, southern British Columbia was a subject to a lithoprobe transect in the 1990s that's got very deep crustal seismology, and there's no evidence of any kind of a flat structure anywhere between Calgary and Vancouver.
In fact, that was one of the wiggle ways around the Churn Creek paleomag data was, oh, well, maybe there's a flat fault in there, and well, I mean, that's a nice idea, but it's not true.
What do you, one of you mentioned there's possibly a fault with major offset way far east in the belt or something like that.
Okay, so if you were Bob Hildebrand, you would say the whole belt is allochthonous and the whole belt has been moved in. So why don't you just bring that sucker down to southern latitudes, which would do it?
Well, what do you think about that?
Well, there's no evidence for it, but it's and we could get into the details, but fundamentally, the Eastern Belt is tied to North America. So the sands in the Eastern Belt come off of North America. So it's pretty hard to say, oh, well, all of those belt rocks are, many thousands of Ks allochthonous.
Mahoney, can you see these questions too?
Yep, I can. I
You're
tried to answer.
welcome
I can't answer them.
Okay. Well, that's totally fine. We're just kind of doing what we can.
I can't type in the chat. For some
Well,
reason,
you're good.
sending messages is only supported for hosts. So I can't send that in the chat.
Yeah. So I'm viewers, I'm enjoying all these questions. I'm purposely not mentioning the ones about magnetic field because again, we're waiting until January for that. So I'm just trying to grab a few more for our experts here today. Kyle asks, Paul, what was going on in the Alexander terrain during the time of Upper Nanaimo deposition? Do you know anything about the Alexander terrain, Paul?
I'm going to turf that to Mahoney. My feeling, from what I remember, is that the Alexander terrain has been tied to the North American Paleozoic and is not extremely allochthonous. Mahoney?
Well, the Alexander terrain is linked to the Wrangellia terrain by late Pennsylvanian Permian plutons. So whatever was happening to the Wrangellia had to be happening to the Alexander at the same time. So they're definitively tied together in the late Paleozoic. That's Luke Baranik's work.
Keep it going here. Toughen Up Fluffy asks, what caused the rapid subsidence in the middle of the Nanaimo Basin? Yeah, what happened 84 million years ago? Do you agree that the floor dropped out, first of all, in the Nanaimo Basin?
No question about it. There's all kinds of stuff that blows up at that time frame. And people will argue that what was going on is there was a very a rapid change in the motion of the Kula plate at that time. There was a change to a more oblique convergence and a higher tangential velocity in the Kula plate, and that caused that there are thrust faults popping up in the belt supergroup at this time. The Idaho batholith is coming out of the ground very rapidly at this time. The Nanaimo group bottom's falling out of the Nanaimo group. Northwestern North America is blowing up at this time frame. So it's all tied together.
And what specifically happened with the Kula plate in your mind?
The argument, and Dan Coots talked about this in his paper as well. The argument is that the Kula plate, the guys who look at this at the plate motions argue that the Kula plate sped up and changed its orientation right about that time in the mid 80s.
But that's not your view?
No, that's fine. You have to try. No problem. You have to. The bottom falls out of the Nanaimo Basin in the Upper Nanaimo for sure. It's all deep marine submarine fan stuff for sure.
Is there a reason you only sampled like half a dozen of those quartzite cobbles, Brian? I'm just curious. If we had dozens more, do you think it would confirm the story that you have?
We have laid the story out as we see it. I would love somebody to go do 200 conglomerate cobbles out of the Nanaimo and test the hypothesis. I'll drop that in the lap of the Calgary guys. Go grab a whole bunch of those class and see what happens.
Is it not true, Bri, that you got 6 out of 6? I mean, you didn't sample one that did not match.
We did 5. Every conglomerate class we had is a direct match for stuff that we could find in Idaho and southern British Columbia or Montana.
Okay. This is great. Let's keep it going, viewers. We'll do a few more questions. Looks like these guys are still up for it. Medieval Creatures asks, so when did the insular and the intermontane hook up in the first place?
The people argue as to whether there were linkages in the Jurassic and Cretaceous, but the most definitive link is this late Cretaceous stuff in Churn Creek. That's the most definitive link.
Did I see on that map that the Churn Creek is offset by the Methow? Like there's a piercing point there on both sides of that fault?
Very definitely, yeah. It's offset by the Passaic and by the Fraser Fault, and so that little chunk of yellow stuff where we put in the Churn Creek that slides right back down and connects up to the Methow, which has the same age conglomerates in it as well.
So since I'm just freelancing now, Brian and Paul, so since I've just kind of ignored the intermontane to this point, I'm hearing from you that if I want to be totally faithful to the paleomagnetic evidence, I need to go back earlier than 85 million years ago and realize that before 85 million years ago, the intermontane and the insular are moving south.
Yep.
And then they're coming back north.
Yep.
And that's more of a problem in your guys' eyes than just moving the thing north. You're having to move it south and north.
How do you move a piece of territory that big past the Sierra Nevada twice without leaving any structural stratigraphic evidence that it exists?
Thank you. Cuslam asks, is the size of the conglomerates from Idaho consistent with the transport distance in this case? Like, what do you know about conglomerates or size of blocks or density of blocks and how close you are to the source? Is there some basic cardinal rules there?
Well, the quartzite class is a pretty robust beast. In the Nanaimo conglomerates, there's lots and lots of volcanic class and plutonic class that we've just assumed are coming from the Coast Plutonic Complex. You get a few carbonate class and stuff like that, but the ones that really stand out are these white and pink quartzite class. And so you've got to be transporting them, 100 kilometers or more, 200 kilometers. They got to go a long distance. But somebody in the chat said, well, what about the Mississippi River that transits, thousands of kilometers down North America? You go to the Mississippi Delta, there aren't any quartzite class. They don't make it that far. They don't go thousands of kilometers, but they can go 100 or more.
But the other thing is, you don't have to move them down in one hit. You can move them a little way and then a little way, and so that's a wiggle worm way out of that problem. But yeah, they don't have to go in one flood.
How about 2 or 3 more and then we're done, you guys? Will Hopkins asks, so where do you think the Methow originated?
Some work from Mark Kiesling, one of Paul's students, and Kathy DeGraff and some other folks. The Methow probably originated as the Cretaceous portion of the Methow probably originated as a four-arc basin to Quinella, to the Quinella Arc on the Intermontane. The zircon data shows the Methow, the Cretaceous age Methow, is Albion Cenomanian Methow, is filled with grains that are coming directly from the Plutons to the east out of Quinella.
Okay, this is new for me. So I know you did your dissertation in the Methow, or you were heavily involved in it. Yeah. So the Methow is a four-arc basin on the Intermontane, and the Nanaimo is a four-arc basin on the Insular. Is that a safe way to say that?
Yeah, that works. That works. The Methow basin is kind of a hybrid four-land basin. It's a complicated thing, but they're also different ages. The Methow sits on the Triassic Spider Peak, which is oceanic floor material. Then you got the Boston Bar Formation sitting on top of that. So these Jurassic rocks that I worked on. And then on top of that, you got these Cretaceous Albion Cenomanian sediments. All of this is happening way before these late Cretaceous conglomerates. All this is so the Methow was being exhumed by the time the Nanaimo started to form. So the Methow is older than the Nanaimo is.
So going back a few decades, Paul, when you first started learning about this detrital zircon possibility and the lab in Australia and everything, why wouldn't you go to those Paleozoic sedimentary rocks first that you and all of your students were working on in the Smoky Mountain scene, or did you?
Well, as a matter of fact, the first DZ study I did was on the Mississippian Copper Basin conglomerate. John Preacher's thesis area, and we took a clast and we took the matrix, and we probably did we do them inside? Anyway, Mark Fanning ran the data, and lo and behold, the matrix of the conglomerate and the clast had the same zircon signature, which means that the matrix was made of eroded clasts. And this, and it was like, whoa, that really worked. That was a direct hit. So that was the first one.
Okay. And then by this point, Mahoney's up working in the Methow or whatever. I'm just writing the narrative myself or whatever. And now you're going, well, maybe Paul's thinking, well, maybe I'll head up to the belt and do that same process and see if we can connect, because Mahoney's up in BC now. Is that kind of how this kind of got into Baja BC stuff? Or
I wrote an NSF grant in 1995 based on Daryl's paper, so to test this hypothesis. And once I got that NSF grant, I called up Paul and said, "Hey, Paul, let's get some students working up there." And so we started with Mark Kiesling. Then we had Jim Reister. We started working on that problem. So I kind of suckered Paul in with a little sweet talk.
And why did Cowan's paper motivate you so much, Brian?
because the middle Jurassic rocks we looked at in the years prior to that time suggested that those rocks hadn't been moved very far. And so all of a sudden these guys want to run a big, huge, massive translational structure right through the rocks that myself and my colleagues at the Geological Survey of Canada have been mapping for many years. And that fault just didn't seem to exist. And so we wanted to take a look at, see, we were testing the hypothesis, is there a fault running through here that we don't see? And that's
And that culminated in a Penrose in Winthrop in 1999. Were you both there?
Yep. I led it with Basil Tikoff and Julie Maxon.
Well, that must have been interesting.
It was very interesting. It was
Well,
a great
I mentioned this with Basil a few shows ago. Like, I keep waiting for some sort of result from that meeting, but I'm not sure I found anything. So was it just like we'll agree to disagree, or was there more conclusion to that Penrose that you remember?
Well, my conclusion was we killed a zombie, but I didn't know it was a zombie at the time.
Okay. Oh, this is good. Okay, one more question, and I can't find anything easily, I guess. I'm just going to call it here. So, Paul Link, Idaho State University, Brian Mahoney, formerly of UW Eau Claire, although I may be still
one more semester.
One more semester. Good. I thank you guys both for your time here. I really appreciate you being part of this, even though it seemed like it was going to be, I don't know what it seems like to you, but it was nice to hear from somebody who has a different narrative, and we will just continue to learn together. And I thank you both for your time this morning.
You bet. Nice talking to y'all.
Pleasure.
All right.
Okay. See you later.
Thank you guys. Have a good day. Bye-bye. Paul Lincoln, Brian Mahoney, everybody. Hope you enjoyed that discussion. All sorts of things to think about and follow up on as we continue. If it's not clear to you, we're not doing the Paleo Mag until January because of scheduling stuff. Couldn't get those guys to come on the program until January. So, and the Calgary guys were ready to roll. So that was my call. And interestingly, I think I'm just more motivated than ever to look at that Paleo Mag stuff. Again, I don't know hardly anything. I've talked to Merle Beck a few times, and I've never really carefully read those papers, mostly because I'm not that bright, and I'm going to need some help as I go through. And I do have a few paleomagnetist people who have a long track record in the world of PaleoMag who are not interested in joining us live, but have graciously allowed or offered to help me off camera. And so it's not just going to be me, and the cat reading these papers. I am going to be getting some help. But I kind of like the way this is rolling, that there's just more and more curiosity, isn't there, about what the details in this paleomagnetic data says. And is it really a huge problem or not? I just saw a comment from Brandon. Did Nick just get moved down the scale? And Ken said, sounds like something is seriously wrong with PaleoMag. Let me keep going. What else are you saying about PaleoMag? I'm just curious. I know I can watch the replay here, but anyway. Before I sign off, I will say, I had flashbacks number one. I mean, I was right there freezing my ass off. Sorry, Patrick, on an outcrop, listening to Mahoney and Link holding court in the snow. in central Idaho, and I had still try to figure out what time zone I was in, fresh off the boat from Wisconsin. You know, I had to change my plates. Wisconsin to Idaho. And those guys are field geologists. And if nothing else, I hope you heard that there's this intense emphasis on field observation and a lot of vibrant, sometimes intense discussion at an outcrop. And the theme is, I need to see it. I need to see. Show me on your map. Show me where this fault is. I'm not going to put the fault in otherwise. I'm reluctant to put that fault in. If you've ever done any field mapping or if you've taught students in the field, I'll just riff off of that. I've taught students in the field, sophomores, for 20 years. And the students are like confused. And then as soon as they're confused, they just put a fault in. They go, well, I can't make sense of this. Let's just put a fault in. That'll solve it. And I would be the person saying, look, don't put a fault in there until we absolutely have to put a fault in. Let's cover more ground. Let's bang open more rocks. Let's see that drainage from a couple other angles. Now, our field area now is not 10 square miles. It's the entire western part of North America. So it's impossible to just keep covering ground on foot until you know for sure if you need a fault or not. But that's where these guys are coming from. And so am I down to an 8? Maybe I am after that discussion, because I remember those conversations and I was trained to think as simply as possible. But I'm not below an 8 at the moment, because I have enough people that I respect and value that say, I've looked at all that paleomag stuff and it still holds up 50 years later. But I'm just taking their word for it. And that's the main thing I'm doing this winter. I'm done taking their word for it. I don't even know what natural remnant magnetism is or some paleopole. I don't know what any of that stuff is. It can't be that hard. I should be able to figure out some basics along with you. Speaking of you, a toast to you. Cold water. Here's to you for joining us today on a snowy, wintry Saturday morning. Here's to your health. Sunheit. Here's to your health and your mental health and the health of your community and your family members near and far. Here's to Dr. Paul Link for spending time with us this morning. Paul was a very important person in my development as a geology guy. So thanks again, Paul Link. And thanks to J. Brian Mahoney, with one more semester to go at University of Wisconsin, Eau Claire. Both of those guys have been incredibly prolific over the last 30 plus years. So here's to Mahoney for finding a few moments to join us. I wasn't sure it was going to happen, but he agreed kind of at the last minute to join us. So thanks to him, Brian Mahoney. Programming note before we say goodbye to each other. That was session G. And tomorrow morning, less than 24 hours from now, on Sunday, December 11th at 9 a.m. Pacific time, session H with Erin Donaghy from Purdue University. And Erin will be sharing some of her detrital zircon work. So that's the bridge that we will have tomorrow. We'll keep talking about zircons, but not necessarily from the Nanaimo. And even though her work is on rocks that are younger than Baja BC, I think there are many reasons that our discussion with Erin tomorrow will help get us ready to talk about the Coast Mountains batholith next Wednesday and next Saturday. aka the Coast Plutonic Complex. And so, as promised, let's celebrate the end of our 4th of 4 Nanaimo shows by eating a Nanaimo bar together from Vindman's Bakery. You've got to love it. Vindman's Bakery in beautiful downtown Ellensburg. You've got to love it. I confess that I had a half of a Nanaimo bar right before we started this morning. I was feeling a little groggy. So here's what a Nanaimo bar looks like. I assume named after Nanaimo, British Columbia, which is part of the Nanaimo group, which has been our first focal point of the winter. I hope you see clearly why we spent 4 shows on the Nanaimo. Not only has there been some recent work done on it, but many decades worth of work on the Nanaimo. That was a sneak attack. You didn't see that one coming. Thank you, dear viewers. I love you, and we'll see you tomorrow with Aaron Donaghy. Have a good day. Delicioso. That ain't no whale.